Dying to be Stuckmocky, Chapter 4. Waiting it out. "To what game are you referring?" asked the Stuckmocky, with one of his penetrating stares. Vira held his gaze for only a moment before feeling too confronted. She still wasn't used to the fact that Stuckmockies weren't dull-witted, anonymous combatants offered for her amusement. "Oh, you wouldn't be interested," she tailed off. Out of the corner of her eye she saw the Stuckmocky continue to stare at her, and she had the distinct sense he was freely harvesting information from her, whether she spoke or not. "Hey!" she protested, making eye contact. "Hey, what?" he asked, as his stare penetrated all the way to the back of her skull. "Hey, whatever it is you're doing, don't. It's freaky." "I am merely looking at you very closely." "Well, where I come from, that's considered rude," she returned. The intensity of his gaze withdrew for a moment, then flared again. "Where do you come from? You have told me nothing about yourself, other than, in spite of the evidence, your little box is not magic, and that you have doubts about the validity of my existence." Vira's hostility melted. "Oh, I'm sorry. I do apologize for suggesting you aren't real. This must all be very confusing for both of you. I know it is for me. I just wanted to prevent a terrible tragedy." Mirren propped himself up on an elbow and spoke in a theatrical wail. "And yet we have the terrible tragedy of my incandescent career now flickering to its death at my feet. Although," he said as he held up the stubby holder, "this is some small consolation. I never did approve of the other trinkets sold in my name." "If only you'd seen the Mirren underpants," mused Vira quietly. "But you're right," she said, turning to the Stuckmocky. "I've completely interrupted the game, combat, without any explanation." "Oh, I can't complain about that. We Stuckmocky nearly always succumb to the gladiators in spite of our superior attributes. I can never understand why that is." "That might be because I'm a level 10, admitted Vira guiltily. Then a thought occurred to her. Stuckmocky, not Stuckmockies? Stuckmocky, singular and plural. Like sheep or fish, but with a good deal more going on up here, he said, tapping his furry head. "But who are you?" he persisted. "You speak in linguistic riddles and have an unusual interest in language for someone of your apparent age." "Her name is Vira Hanka Fibonacci, Vira for short," inserted Mirren, his gaze still fixated by his stubby holder. Vira turned to Mirren with surprise. "You know my name and my gender." Mirren made the supreme sacrifice of transferring his eye contact to her. "Your name was clearly imparted to me at the stadium. Your gender, however, was not until moments ago. And speaking of gender," he said, turning now to the Stuckmocky, "as much as I find the whole topic distinctly distasteful, you claim you have none?" Mirren fell back on his seat with an air of despair. "What more of my nobility can be stripped from me today? I've been engaged in battle with a mere eunuch." The Stuckmocky bellowed a fetid roar of protest as he stood up, and would have advanced on Mirren except for the console button Vira casually held down with her thumb. Now, Mr. Stuckmocky, as much as I think he fully deserves it, I won't let you rearrange Mirren's body parts for him. Yet." Vira looked pointedly at Mirren, but his eyes were locked with his furry adversaries. The Stuckmocky exhaled a pungent sigh of resignation and sat down again. "Verherrgion," he muttered after a moment. "Verherrgion?" queried Vira. "Is that some sort of insult?" "It is my name. You surely did not think I was actually called Mr. Stuckmocky, did you?" "Honestly, I hadn't thought about it at all. Sorry, again. Look, can we just start over? Perhaps you could explain to us about this no-gender thing. We're going to have to stay here until that angry mob disperses, so we may as well get to know each other. What we're going to do then, though, I have no idea." Vira looked into the Stuckmocky's eyes, Verherrgion's eyes, with interest. "It is just as I said earlier. I am genderless. Naturally," he said emphatically to the self-absorbed Mirren. All Stuckmocky are. Well, that raises all sorts of questions then, mused Vira. The most important one being, which pronoun do I use for you? Verheerjon looked at her with surprise and something possibly resembling admiration. It will suffice, although we have more apt pronouns in our own language. Are you not going to ask me how we reproduce? Ah, well, not that I'm not totally interested, but... Vira suddenly flushed bright pink. Maybe later. In fact, I'm sure you're sick of having to explain it, so maybe much later. Vira was having an alarming image of thrashing furry limbs in her mind, and had to flick her head and clear her throat loudly in order to rid herself of it. So, she said, groping around in alarm for a question to redirect the conversation. Do you have any children? Oh, yeah, great one, you idiot, she added to herself under her breath. Before Verheerjon could respond, an acolyte of Luuparsoss entered the antechamber from the darkened room beyond, and drew up short at the sight of the trio. Gentlemen, he said doubtfully, would you care to consult the father? Mirren looked pointedly at Vira. A certain person may have a theological objection to that. His eyes dropped to the console in her hand. Well, Vira considered, I can't see any problem if certain other people can keep from overexerting themselves during the consultation. She pressed a button, and both Mirren and Verheerjon shifted slightly in their seats. Realizing they'd been released from her control, they both stretched themselves and rose cautiously, never breaking eye contact with each other. The acolyte's attention slid from one to the other of the three. Who would like to be the first supplicant? Vira noted Mirren and Verheerjon's mutually hostile stares, and turned to the acolyte. I think we'd like to pay our respects as a team. We do everything together. She turned a beaming smile on the other two, and rose to enter the darkened chamber beyond. The acolyte moved slightly to block her way, as he looked warily at the swords strapped to the waists of the other two. I'm afraid all weapons must be left with me. He tried to smile placatingly as the swords were simultaneously unstrapped and dropped into his arms. The stubby holder, however, remained defiantly cradled in Mirren's hands. The inner chamber was fragrantly gloomy, and Vira at first had trouble making out what she was seeing, especially as she was focused on forming a buffer between the two adversaries. When she realised Mirren was kneeling before a large statue that towered into the twilight above, she relaxed somewhat. She could hear him predictably mumbling a prayer for the restoration of his noble honour, so she turned to Verheerjon at her side and whispered, I wonder if I'm the first female ever to come in here. I know with certainty I am not the first Stuckmocky, it replied, looking up at the distant height of the statue. Vira followed its gaze and found her vision adjusting to the flickering torchlight as she tipped her head back. Her eyes travelled up the metres-high golden statue of an imposing Luuparsoss, and stopped abruptly when they reached the oversized, genuine Stuckmocky pelt vest. Oh, said Vira in a small voice. And the answer to your earlier question is 10, but only one of my children still lives. All the others have been slaughtered in combat. Verheerjon lowered its head and stared morosely at the floor. Oh, said Vira again, remembering all the nights her father and stepmother had endlessly discussed the finer points of mathematics, while she'd battled Stuckmocky to the death in her bedroom.